Hey everyone, Anthony Fantano here, internet's busiest music nerd. Hope you are doing well. And today we are doing an interview that has been, at least behind the scenes, you wouldn't know, but it has been delayed, pushed back, rescheduled, talked about over and over and over and over and over, considered again and again and again, and now it is finally time for it to happen. We have a rapper, lyricist, songwriter extraordinaire, the one and only Mr. McKinley Dixon, fresh off the release of his latest LP, Magic Alive, which I'm loving, a lot of you are loving. I'd love to talk about the new record and anything else that comes up in the conversation. Yeah, it's right there in the background, along with other standouts in your catalog. Good sir, thank you. And yeah, man, how you doing? Thanks for coming on.
Thank you. I'm having a good day. It's a real nice sunny day outside of Chicago. It's going to be 81 today. So I might stay inside all day. You know how it is. Yeah.
Nice sunny day. A great day to stay inside.
Yeah, I love staying inside. I love my apartment. So, but
are you a homebody? You're an indoorsman?
I am. I definitely feel more comfortable in my space than I do outside of my space. Mm-hmm. And that sort of has led me to write great music. So let's not get it twisted. I have friends, but shit.
Well, the inside your apartment, inside your sacred space, is that where you feel, you've already said comfortable, but is that where you feel the most creative and productive as far as doing music or anything relating to your music generally?
Not really. Actually, I love being with the homies when I feel a lot of my music, the writing of it is like non-linear, right? So I'll write, let me find something. I'll experience a moment and I'll sort of be like, how does this moment make me feel? How does it make me feel in 2 bars? How does it make me feel in 1 bar? And I'll write that down, right? I'll jot down that line, that translation to music and a lyric in my phone. And then I'll sort of do that a bunch of times and I'll come back and I'll come back and I'll come back. And then eventually I'll have a full verse. The cohesion of the verse don't really matter if the overarching theme is you being yourself. You know what I mean? So it's like here's a note from July 24th, 2024. And if you scroll down, it's the beginning of Listen Gentle. It just has 2 boys dance. I just had that idea. And then a couple bars later, I had the idea one suit the other end against you. You know what I mean? So it's I sort of just take these moments in these vignettes and I just put them together to make one song, one verse, not one song. So
you're just kind of piecing it together and kind of going back at these various reference points and just kind of just mashing them up.
Yeah, I mean, I do take I find the intention in the overall song. If I want it to be what I usually, the way I write it is I find a time. I find a time that I want to write from, not a perspective or not I find a time, right? So I'm okay, well, the time, then it's the age, the kid, the view, everything sort of changes with it. And then once I get the beat and the instrumental, I'll probably have half of my verse done. And then that music will then form the in-betweens that connect it all, and the time that I'm writing from, So it's a lot of, it sounds complicated, but really it's just a lot of little moments. I don't write in the house. If I'm writing in the house, then I'm bored. I don't really be writing in the house.
Yeah. And this process that you describe, has this differed with this new album cycle in any way, or were you able to sort of keep consistent with this process from your projects that you've made up until this point? Has there been a radical shift in terms of how it all kind of came together this time around?
No, not really. Honestly, I just love writing like that. I feel that that's how I've always experienced, I feel one of the best things one of the best feelings is trying to be able to describe a beautiful moment or a harrowing moment. I think that's just one of the coolest things ever, to be able to accurately describe what you see. And I think it's something that a lot of people can't do because they don't really hone in on it and stuff like that. But all of these records, are made sort of for me. So they all is really just exercises in me trying to write and processing what I'm seeing and things like that. So it's never varied. I mean, I think maybe the first record I was trying probably a little too hard. I was trying a little too hard because that's the record when I found out Who Thought J's Off. That's the record I found out, I think I was going through sort of the re-education of yourself when you realize that you are Black and you have autonomy and you are growing up. And that was like a really young record. So that one might have been laid on a little bit too thick. But every other record is from the perspective, it's been written like that.
Mm. And it's sort of interesting to hear you kind of describe it this way, because I think there's a lot of people coming into your music that would not necessarily presume almost that kind of fragmented, non-linear fashion of it coming together not being the case, because it does seem like things are so thoroughly conceptual and deeply intentional from like the start. Maybe not narrative in the most obvious ways, but I mean, even pointing at the fact that like there's all these connections even between this record and your last record in terms of like, the imagery and the lyricism and the covers and the halo imagery and so on and so forth. And obviously, you're kind of like building off of the themes of Run, Run, Run with like a sequel track and so on and so forth. Like, how much of this was even conceived by you when you were making your last LP? Like, I'm going to have to like finalize this in a way with another album, or, on this next round of verses and things that you were writing where you're like, this needs to be a continuation in some way because there's maybe stuff like left unsaid or like loose ends that I have to tie up.
So each record is a different record for me, right? So I don't use my records. I don't really use my records to process, if that makes sense. I don't really use them to, if it's done, it's done. I like it being, if it's done, it's done, right? I like having short glimpses of things that are really impactful. So really with Beloved Paradise Jazz, and it's also like, I think the big thing about my music is not really that like, the rapping and the instrumentation, it's all very impressive in its own right. But I think the real impressive thing is that I sort of keep an eye to the past, present, and future. And I can sort of write about that in a really nice way, right? So I've always talked about Magic Alive in Beloved Paradise Jazz near the end of it in ways, it's like, I've talked about Beloved Paradise Jazz or Magic, I've talked about Beloved Paradise Jazz in For My Mama, and it's like, they don't really, they all, like I was saying before, all of it is cohesive because it's all me, it's all my intention. It's all me trying to just figure out my own world. You know what I mean? And I think that makes it so I don't have to continue with the, I could have made Beloved Paradise Jazz too, but it just wouldn't have worked. It just felt like my ideas were done with the record. Magic Alive, like Run, Run, Run. It's also sort of like, this one's a movie in a way, right? So there's a story that is like a story more so than a movie, but there's the epilogue and the prologue, and then there's sort of these short glimpses into the overarching story, not the full thing, right? So Run, Run, Run 2 is sort of like the sequel. It's like the big sequel to the big first film. Like, I just thought that was a cool idea. And that's really the concept of that. But I already knew I was going to do Run, Run, Run 2 because I just thought Run, Run, Run 1 was just something I could not ignore, and that, it's all connected in my head and in my notebook. But on the actual paper, they're very separate albums. That's all to say. They're all separate albums,
Okay. I mean, still, it's like kind of hard to ignore some of these like continuations and through lines, and I have to ask, sort of like, even if they are separate albums with separate stories and concepts and ideas going into them, like I have to wonder, for you creatively, because obviously there's a reference point on this album as well with recitative if I'm pronouncing that correctly. I have to know, how does the work of someone like Toni Morrison continue to, serve as an inspiration point for you, even on a record like this, where maybe it's not as over a nod as it was on your last album. Like, it's still here in some form for sure.
I mean, honestly, that was just because Toni Morrison, a real ass G, and I'm trying to be a real ass G, so I'm trying to live my life like her. Shoot, like, that record
is just an admiration point for you.
I mean, she just real as fuck with it. You know what I mean? Like, and it is also, I try to live my life with the same intentions that my music is, like Magic Alive, it's a cool title and the concept's cool, but I also sort of try to live my life with the intention of, like, what I view as magic. Reading is a really great way to access the past, present, and future. And if I really want to write about it like I do, I have to read, and I think Toni Morrison influenced me so much that it also, Toni Morrison influenced me so much, even to the point that Recitative is based off the title of her only short stories. And that story follows two children as they age, right? And it's broken up. And it's like, that is not only a nod to her, but it's a nod to, like, my real life and how I feel about it. She's just real ass one. And I think it's all because it does exist in my cinematic universe. Like, I view my music as, like, a legacy. I don't view it as McKinley Dixon. I view it as, okay, at the end of this decade, can I look back and be like, I'm very proud of my decisions I made, not only in my personal life, but through my music, which is my personal life. So it all fits in my one cinematic universe. That's why it's all so many references, and it's also like, everybody is, even if it's a new story, everybody is everybody is the same character. So it's like, I love media, right? So if I had a collection of films, it's like, I don't want to compare it to Tarantino because whatever, bro. It's like, literally, my collection of films is these albums, these stories, and these characters, maybe different people, but they sort of play in the same world, right? And I think that is a easy way to build on lore and have so many other people involved, but it's also just a really cool way to make a record be fresh and new, but also, like, stay within the realms of, oh yeah, you've heard that Toni Morrison record. You heard Live from the Kitchen Table reference on Wash My Hands, even though it's, like, not even the same thing, And I think it's just fun. It's a little magic. Magic is an intersection of, like, time and luck and knowing where your proximity to the land is. So I think it's, like, cool to learn to keep that in there. Yeah, I think that's nice.
It seems like a lot of your takeaways come from, like, this admiration for what she's doing, and you build it into your own stuff in terms of, like, world building and just like character portraits and that sort of thing, and kind of building your lyricism and your art in that way, as opposed to just all of it coming from just simply your own first person perspective, which there's for sure, like, we know there's a lot of great art made that way, and there's a lot of great ways you can communicate ideas through that, but it sort of seems like, you're in a similar authorship sort of way, finding ways or needing to create ways in order for you to communicate those same ideas, but you sort of, like, need a vessel through which to kind of present them in a way.
Yeah. And it's like, that's why I feel like, so that's an interesting one, because I think that there's a few types of artists, but I think there's the artist that sort of makes the music so general it can fit on anybody, right? And anybody can see themselves in it. And then I feel like there's artists that are speaking so specifically to their life, it is something that, you can't identify with, but it is their thing. But then I feel like I try to keep it as I try to keep, whenever I'm talking about something, as it's all of us. And I think that then allows me to write a more interesting story, but it also allows people to see themselves in it in specific ways that, it's a mixture. It's not just a general thing, though you are involved, but it's also not a specific thing where you can't see yourself in it. I think saying we, when I'm writing and when I'm telling these stories, there's a lot of heavy lifting, and that is just an easy way to sort of keep it fresh, keep people interested, and also make it more like a movie or like a story that you're involved with, but you're not really able to say much on, So Yeah.
Yeah, I mean that's it presents an interesting question, one that I feel like a lot of music fans these days need to sort of think about a lot more, because I think after 10 years of kind of the internet bringing rise to sometimes like all of this like left field and very thoughtful and very sort of like challenging and artsy music coming out of the hip hop field and just like coming out of black music in general,
Mm-hmm.
and that being able to, in a time period in the internet, be able to gain like an audience of people, a white audience, but others as well, who don't necessarily have like an intimate knowledge and experience of like the life experience and the perspective that a lot of these albums are built off of. Like, I think for sure we're seeing that these albums and these artists, be it like a J. Cole or a No Name or a Kendrick Lamar, like they're finding these listeners who don't necessarily have like a personal connection to the walk of life that these albums are coming from, but there's still like kind of a connection that even though there is this exposure point, are these listeners like actually getting it?
Yeah.
Like, is the message actually translating?
Yes.
You have to ask yourself when you can have somebody who's like, on Twitter and simultaneously considers themselves like a JPEG Mafia fan, but then also a Trump voter. You know what I
Yes.
mean?
Exactly.
Like, there's
And
something
it's easy.
like
That's easy to happen.
there's yeah, and no, it is easy. It is easy to happen, and it's not necessarily like, but it's and that's not sort of like that's not laid at the foot of the artist.
Yes.
It's like, I'm just saying there are these like sort of disconnects, and I want to know, like, from your perspective as an artist who's obviously, whose music is connecting with people who don't necessarily relate directly to the art you're creating, like, if you're seeing any of that disconnect with people who listen to your stuff, and where do you feel like those potholes are happening? Is it just due to people not really paying attention? Is it due to the easy access and there's not really sort of any need to think about what you're consuming more deeply because it just kind of comes across your timeline? You don't really need to sort of like, challenge yourself to consider the things that are being presented to you. Like, why are some of these messages going over people's heads, even with some artists being as obvious and as clear and as in your face as they are with the things that they're trying to communicate?
I think that it is all of those things and sort of the commodification of like Black trauma. I think Black trauma is such a spectacle in a lot of households. And it's like, we could talk about how the internet age has affected all that because it's so obvious, you know what I mean? But for me specifically, the album before For My Mama, Anyone Who Like Her, which was a big access point for a lot of my internet music fans, you know what I mean? Like a big point for them of access, and who are also a lot of white fans, a lot of young white fans. That was my 2021 record, and it detailed the trauma of losing my best friend Tyler and sort of what that means and how that affects not only me, but the people back home, how his loss affects this neighborhood that I walk on and the people that live on that street, and how I haven't been home in a long time, a lot of different things. But it was a very overtly and obviously dealing with a lot record, right? The record before that, The Importance of Self-Belief, was a very positive record. One that even in the title was about sort of the joy of being young and Black, you know what I mean? And I think, the numbers are there for even how that went. And I think that sort of, and it's, we just are drawn to a life that is inherently interesting, and Black people are inherently interesting, and I think you can't help it, you can't help it to be so, especially if you love hip hop, you can't help but be so involved in Black culture, even if you don't agree with it, and that's because we was even talking about like the Tracy Chapman Fast Car cover, it's like, it's just crazy how that it's a commodification of Black trauma. I think Black trauma is something that a lot of people don't feel, so they don't identify with, and they only see it in movies and in media, and they love that. They love not being able to be there actually on the street that it is. They love being able to be like, whoa, I learned how to crip walk from watching Kendrick Lamar video, you know what I mean? So I think that's like, it is accessibility. Rap music is becoming accessible. It is also just more people are being pushed to the forefront of what we're seeing. A lot more specific white demographic is being pushed to the forefront nowadays. And I think that's, they just want to be involved. And that's the worst part about it, is that if you sort of fall into that, I think it's easy to fall into that, I don't know. But that's all to say. It's definitely folks being like, what's the coolest story ever? And being like, oh, in America, it's probably a Black person. It's probably from a Black person, and then being able to just jump into that and be like, well, now I'm done. You know what I mean? Now I completely fell in love with this whole, I think I know everything about this. I know everything about that. And now I just sort of stepped out of it, without doing one African-American studies course, I guess, whatever, man. I don't know. So.
Yeah. I mean, I think like what you're kind of describing in a roundabout way is like, because of the access and people are giving this music a try and they're peering into the world that these artists are sort of like, presenting out there, on the internet for everyone to see. But, you as a creator, nobody as a creator really has any sort of like control as to whether or not people are approaching it in a way where they're actually like appreciating the art that's being created, from the standpoint of like, whoa, this is like a really big creative feat that's like happening in front of me. Or if it's just a voyeuristic thing. Like, oh, I'm just kind of peeping into this just because it's like this kind of cool, weird thing that seems like odd and alien and unfamiliar to me. And I'm just going to peep in on it. And because I'm so sheltered outside of like looking in through this window, I don't really need to sort of be confronted with the fact that this is like what's being described as reality for some people. So it doesn't become real for me. I just get to watch it like it's TV.
Exactly. And I think Magic Alive is a special record for me because it is my first record where I feel like I separated myself the most, like Beloved Paradise Jazz was how I view the world through the teaching of Toni Morrison and trying to figure all that out. You know what I mean? For My Mom and Anyone Who Like Her was me sort of coming to grips with the past, present, and future of the things that I'm seeing in front of my life. And then like even back, the importance of belief, like these records are all so personal, right? And I think this one was the first one where I could write it. I could not, I could separate myself from the one-on-one comparisons that are coming, and I think and it felt great. I think that was like one of the best writing experiences because I was able to be like, oh, the commodification of this will come in more of a joyous effort than like for My Mama, the number one song being like Make a Poet Black, where it's like there's only so many amounts of times somebody can walk up to you and be like, Make a Poet Black is such a great song, and you're like, bro, like that song is a great song, but also like, you know what I mean, like this is my life. And it's like I appreciate it. I love everybody who run up on me and say that, you know what I mean? But it also is a lot of times where it's just like my music is so vulnerable that others feel that they can just be as vulnerable as there's that sort of disconnect right there. And I think that comes from the access to, you have access to so many artists and so many things nowadays that you don't really need to do research on if you want to know more about. You can just sort of listen to them and be like, I think I got everything, and I think specifically with white fans, there's so many things historically that, that you can't really even, where do I begin? But yeah, in a roundabout way, I'm pretty much just saying that access is so everywhere. It's everywhere for Black culture. And you don't really got to think too much about it now to be like, how do I enter this? How do I enter this with the right intention, So.
I want to dig further on a point that you kind of made, you glossed over really quickly earlier, because I do think it does kind of define the tone of the album a little bit. And like you say, it does create like an interesting sort of separation point because, while obviously there are themes of this album that do deal in sort of like, death and murder, simultaneously, I feel like it's the reaction to that, plot point that kind of defines the record, because in response to that, there's like this, there's this celebration, there's this embrace of like memory and keeping people alive in, the magical ways that you sort of can. And there's like a lot of positivity and there's a lot of joy on the album. And, I mean, that's refreshing in a musical landscape that, even outside of like the racial politics that we could analyze here does seem to commodify, like, again, a lot of pain, a lot of trauma, a lot of sorrow, and try to do its best to sort of like, you know, market to fans based on like, here's the saddest, most depressed, most drug addled, most miserable person on a stage that we could present to you, you know, relate to them because we know that you're feeling awful as well. And it seems like, you know, maybe not in a way where you're like trying to consciously go against the grain, but, you know, you're choosing to take a different path and like, this is going to be a positive experience where I'm like trying to bring some light and bring some joy into the situation here in a way.
Yeah. So like I'm saying, like, because I try to live everything and all my music is like me fully and it's all my intention. What I learned the most from Toni Morrison is that, you know, moments are beautiful and beautiful does not mean they're not harrowing. Moments are harrowing does not mean they're not beautiful. You know, like all of this is all encompassing, right? So you sort of need the juxtaposition because that makes a full life. And I think with this record, taking what I learned from that and going into this one, it was the only obvious next step for me was to make something that sounded like, you know, you're having the time of your life, even though it is a hard day. You know, I think it's a summer record. I'm getting older and I definitely sort of am contemplating the trajectory of my life and my career and my loved ones and how certain moments in time came before to lead to where we at now, to where we're going into the future. And I just felt joy knowing that I'm still here. You know what I mean? And I think joy does not mean beautiful moments. It don't mean bad moments. It don't mean happy moments. It just sort of means like I'm feeling right now. And I think that is what that record is. It's not like it is very joyous and it is also very sad. And I think those are just what I'm feeling. And it never really occurred to me that, like, even when I was writing, like, even We're Outside, Rejoice, Rejoice is like the most uplifting one on the record, I would say. And that song even is like me going back home, you know what I mean? Like, till death do us sin, never ran, less against raised hand to my kin. Sitting on the porch with man who could barely use limbs, probably the only vice from niggas I'm finna take in, you know what I mean? And it's like leaving and never coming back. And it's like, but that's still, I'm happy to be outside. You know, I think you can't exist. Those juxtapositions are always happening. And I just couldn't, you know, I can't. Writing a sad song is a happy song sometimes. I don't know. You know what I mean? So, yeah, it's a joyous record, but it's a real record, you know?
Well, with those kind of like musical or not musical, but emotional intentions in mind, like how did that, I guess, direct to get into this part of the process a bit, if you know you'll let us, kind of impact, you know, when you're in the studio and kind of like, you know, you and everybody else who's involved start really kind of like crafting the music on the album, like, you know, all the jazz components and all the beats and so on and so forth, because that obviously as well kind of lines up, whether it be through the horn sections and pianos or the group vocal passages and so on and so forth. Like it all kind of lines up in terms of just this overall positive vibe. You know, how were those emotional intentions kind of guiding the musical process when it came to like, you know, creating certain melodic motifs and so on and so forth?
Yeah, so this question is a little bit long. They all been a little bit long and I've been rambling. This question is a little bit long because to get my sound, like, so everybody that's on Magic Alive was on Who Taught You to Hate Yourself. You know what I mean? Like everybody, like, and this is a 10-year difference, you know? When I'm making a record, so because there's a lot of instrumentalists on it, right? I feel people there's so much, just how, like, even how I used to do it, right? How I used to make these songs I would take my microphone and I disconnect it from my stand. I put it in my backpack. I put the stand behind my back into my backpack and I hop on a bike. I post on Instagram, post on Facebook. I'll be like, I need somebody to record this today. I got some free time. I'm biking around the city. Come and meet me, right? So there'd be a lot of moments where that would happen. And in those times, back in like decades and some change ago, in those times, I would really figure out and try to learn how to talk to different people. You know what I mean? Like I've gotten to this point because I'm trying to work on like learning the most ways I can talk to folks, right? So I found that people record, they were giving me like records and recordings and things back that were either when they felt so unburdened they can focus on this fully with their intention, or they felt so burdened that they could they needed to expel that energy, right? So a decade of doing that with folks and the people that I've known for so long, it becomes this thing where I now know how everybody on this record works, and they know how I work. And now we have more resources. So it's a lot less of people being burdened, and now a lot more people coming in and being unburdened. And now I know how that is, how that sounds. And I think when I come back home and when I come back into the city, it is sort of this like, it's the summertime. We're about to make a record. We have all these demos. Everybody is ready for it. Let's just do this in a week. These records, like we have the demos. We make the demos over the course of several months, but all of it is recorded in like a week's time, right? We're just in the studio for like 12, 15 hours. So, and people just come in, like we stay here all day because sometimes people be at work. Sometimes people work different days. Everybody is just people I've known forever. So the joy of it is people coming in and seeing that it's time to get to work again, you know what I mean? And seeing how the last one sounded and being like, I'm so excited to be here again, because I'm also excited to be here again. So the joy of the records and the sound is just inherent because it's sort of like me calling all of these folks for another heist. You know what I mean? It's like one more time. And everybody loves it one more time. So that's just how that sounds, you know what I mean? And I think that it's just, it's just so obvious. I think that is the biggest part of these records is like, you can feel the love. You can feel, you don't need to be there to hear We Outside and be like, oh, like everybody was having a great time, And I think it's just a decade of working with the people and making sure everybody is honing their craft and trying to remember everybody's name and pronouns for real, and just like never sort of distancing yourself from the people that you love, even as time moves on. Because for real, that's why Magic Alive sounds way different than Who Thought You Hate Yourself, even though all of these were in between and everybody is the same person. You know what I mean? It's like, even with my features, it's like Teller Banks is on Who Thought You Hate Yourself? Maybe not on Who Thought. He might be on Importance of Self-Belief, but he's on this one. He's on this one. He's on this one. He's on this one. We grow. We're all growing. Like, let's come back and try to see what we've all learned at this point. And if you've learned more, then you'll eventually, you'll be back on the record. If you don't learn more, then that's on you. But it's very obvious to tell when time has not, I think the joy of it is, like I'll say, the joy of it is knowing everybody forever and remembering what everybody's got going on. You know what I mean? Going back home to do these records it just makes it sound like magic, because magic is, again, the connection you have with the ground and the past, present, and future to me. And, and luck. So it's like all these people together in this one space, everybody through time and space, right there is like a magical moment, right? To me, in my viewpoint of it. So,
yeah. In order to really kind of like finalize this album musically, like how much evolution are we talking about typically between like the demos that you're coming into the studio with and like the final, product, especially on a record like this that does sort of borrow so much inspiration from jazz, and there's like so many moments on the record that are obviously improvised to some degree. Like how much are we kind of like leaving that up to, everybody who's just there to just kind of like cook up something on the spot? And, how far in advance did you cook up crazy ideas like the track we were just talking about earlier, Recitative, where you had that crazy rock freak out at the very end of the song, because that was like a totally insane, unexpected switch up, obviously.
Yeah. So my music, the way I write is it's supposed to be like a conversation, right? So all of it is supposed to be a conversation with whatever perspective it is at the time, whatever the story is, whatever, blah, blah, blah. So the best way to do a conversation is for me to go up and down, to be emotional, to be feeling. And I think the easiest way to map that canvas is jazz. So It is sort of this thing because jazz can go up and down. You don't gotta worry about it. It's not weird when shit gets horrible and then shit gets really good. I could just sort of I can keep it loose like that. And I think the the demos we have, because I also write so like sporadically in like the sense of like actually just writing it down, it sort of forms more and more as we go. So we'll get a bass line, and a lot of the times I used to play it on key bass. Shouts out to Cav. I used to up until For My Mama, Chain So Heavy. If you from For My Mama, if you heard Chain So Heavy sound like that because I didn't use clicks. I don't use click tracks, but I didn't use click tracks when I was demoing all this shit just in my living room. I didn't use click tracks, so it sounds improvised because I was making these songs for 5 minutes, and I was telling people just play 5 minutes, right? So I tightened up. I got some more producers to help me out and really hone that in. And now the demos are so like we will have a full loop of since we're on Recitative. Recitative is an interesting one because I had a slew of ideas that I wanted to talk to Sam Yamaha about, and I was like, this. And he came back and just like put them all into one big idea, which we didn't really do too much with that one except replace the drums and the guitar and bass at the end. So that's not the best example, but like Crooked Stick, it was a loop. It was like a really crazy loop. And I did my verse. The chorus was already there. Alfred put the chorus on there. Guys got the verse. And then once we got into the studio, we added live drums, changed the bass. We had Tini from Tank the Bangers play horns on that, saxophone on that. It just becomes this thing where if I trust you and you trust me, we know how we work with each other. It's not going to sound bad. It's also like I have a bunch of other gospel musicians sitting in there, and if you sound like trash, they're going to tell you sound like trash. And it's also like the city that we're all from the same city. So it's not like if you sound like trash, you was never going to be in there in the first place. It was never going to make it past, So I leave a lot of trust in there with how like the instrumentation comes out. And it also varies. Like Cav, my bassist, is on every record. So, and he's my live musical director for my shit. So I really trust him when he's like, this sounds not good. We should change the bass. We should change the guitar, But then, and Gina Sobel, who plays the flute on all my records, she also is one that I trust her when she changes stuff around. But a lot of the times, and because I've known everyone for so long, I don't really have to worry about it. So the demos they're pretty early phase. And then we go in and then everybody just lays a bunch of stuff down, and we all see how it sounds,
So there's some good internal community policing going on there in terms of musical quality.
Oh man. Especially because my rhythm section is all gospel kids. So it's like, oh bro, if it sounds bad, they'll be like, this sounds horrible. This sounds like absolute trash. Like they will literally say, especially Cav. Like Cav will tell me, he'll be like, this is out of tune. And I'll be like, I don't hear it. He's like, I can hear it. And it's like, okay, well then shit, I ain't going, you can play the bass. You know, what the fuck, you know what I mean? So I definitely, it's not like strict, but it is like, how did you get here? If you wasn't on these records, how are you here right now? So it's a lot of that. Yeah.
I wanted to ask you about some of the people you brought into this record, maybe starting with Qui Chris, who I know you hold in very high regard.
Yes.
Not only does he have the coolest kind of opening guest verse on the record, but also I know his catalog is something that you hold in high regard, and I think he's I've reviewed him a lot of times on the channel. I've covered him very consistently. I have some highlights in his catalog that I think are amazing. I mean, look, I've spent tons of time proselytizing to these people. Like, you should listen to Qui Chris. He's dope.
You should listen to Qui Chris.
You should listen to Qui Chris.
You should listen to Qui Chris. Yeah.
They've already heard why I think they should listen to him. Like, what is it about him that draws you to him as an artist to this point where, you've made so many records, albums that people hold in really high regard. You've seen the reception that you get on platforms like Rate Your Music, for example.
Thank y'all.
That's
Thank you.
that's the kind of reception that kind of eludes someone like Chris. You know, it's like I sit there and I look at his album sometimes and I was like, why aren't these people on these platforms going crazy for him? You know, like, and not that I need you to explain that or whatever, but I'm saying, you know, at least to hear it straight from you as a fan and you as an artist who you know, also has a deep passion for the music that you create. What is so interesting about Chris to you? What are some highlights in his catalog and what makes him special as an artist to you?
Man, Qui Chris is special to me because he's just like, he is he's the everyday guy. You know what I mean? Like, he is anyone. You can just take his music and it's not so general that anyone can fit on it, but it's not so specific that it like is only to him. It's just so, it just feels like a conversation you have. And it feels like a conversation you're having with a wizard, honestly, especially if you are reaching like, because I just was going through his catalog. Actually, I might have it pulled up here, but like if you are going through, oh yes, literally the first thing I had to pull up on here. It is like, I mean, I've been listening to him since the beginning, but Being You is great. I wish I could be you more often. From just like that start, it just sounds like you're having a conversation with an old friend who is speaking in rhymes. And then every record sounds like, oh, it's good to see you again. You know what I mean? It just, the familiarity of it is like, you're like, I'm happy to see you again, man. You know, and I think that is just what I feel with every single one of his records whenever I hear it. And I thought that would be the perfect sort of character to be on the first song as the guy who is resurrecting, you know, as the person we sort of go to that has like this magical like feeling to resurrect the dead was Qui Chris, you know, even in the name, you know. I think that you should listen to Qui Chris, like truly you should listen to Qui Chris. So, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, one thing that's always struck me about him is that even on some of his darkest records and some of his records lately have gotten, you know, like pretty dark emotionally.
Yeah.
Is he's always got like a bit of an absurd sense of humor streak
Exactly.
to his work. There's always like a bit of absurdism to it. Sometimes I feel like that is so in your face that it almost like gets in the way of the accessibility of the music itself. But like, I always appreciate his like wit and sense of humor, especially on records like Ghost at the Finish Line. Like there's always like something like a record like that. Some of the best songs on that record to me read almost like a rap Pee-wee's Playhouse or something, you know.
No, exactly.
Like, you feel like you're entering into like a really weird, like the weird absurdist world that like Marvin the Martian used to inhabit, something like that.
Exactly.
I feel like I'm entering into like a very odd kind of like trippy cartoon or something.
Yeah, and it's just like, and it never is too much. It's just too real sometimes, you know. It's never like, Qui Chris.
It's real and surreal at the same time.
Exactly. You know, it's just like, and it's also just stuff that I feel like, you know, you live in a city, you just sort of experience and hear. Qui Chris is just so easily magical when he writes and makes these concept albums that, you know, guns, like niggas men, like where you even begin? The Jean Grey album, like every record. And it's very inspirational also to see the longevity and the quality. That's another thing about Qui Chris is that the quality and the longevity has never been lacking. It's never fallen off even through the time. You know, I could put on any Qui Chris record and be like, this could be his best one. This could be his best one. Yeah.
And the record ends off with another kind of like key feature, and that's with West Coast rapper Blue, who plays almost even more conceptual of a role on the album that I would love to kind of hear you kind of go over and dissect a little bit, because it does seem like such a pivotal moment on the album, because you're literally having a moment where you're almost like, you know, mulling over all of these existential questions about yourself and your work and, you know, just life itself.
Yeah.
And then Blue kind of like tops the album off communicating to you as this poster up on the wall.
Yeah.
And I sort of wanted to like, you know, because again, as you say, like a lot of these stories you're telling on the album aren't exactly linear in the most obvious fashion. Like, where did that narrative idea come out for you, and what made you feel like this needed to be the final moment on the album, where kind of the poster that you're looking up to is kind of telling you at least from my interpretation, like, oh, it's all been in you, it's been in your work, and you need to sort of like search for it in there, you know, the answers you're seeking.
Yeah. So, so I view these stories as having prologues and epilogues, right? Like a storybook dude. So, you know, wash my hands at the beginning. That's sort of like, here's what you're about to experience. Here's like the kids come around, magic alive is within the hands of, you know, the firefly, whatever it is. The magic is like this. Like we're all getting together about to read or experience this, right? So then it ends with Magic Alive, this title track, and then it goes into the afterwards, which is Could Have Been Different, which it is like, and it's this one's a little hard concept because you would never really, unless like Beloved Paradise Jazz is the same way. It's broken up into 3 storybook parts, like every couple songs, the intro and the forward, and every song is like a book, right? Like a Toni Morrison book, right? So this one, and usually also with my stage presence too, and how I explain that is all of these big moments will happen in your life, right? And then you still go back to a place of reprieve, which is the home, the house, you know, your bedroom. So that song is, you know, the afterwards of the story, the processing what is gone, what is happening, what we all just went through, and a moment of reprieve in a way, specifically for me or the character, whatever. And it then becomes this sort of thing where it's like, well, what could have been different? What's next? The past, and how the past upon the future? I'm overwhelmed. You know what I mean? Like, this is, you know, just because the day has ended does not mean it's the end of the day. You know what I mean? And I think that song was meant as a, you know, epilogue and prologue sort of thing. And then that specific verse was for me. You know, it was because it's all about, you know, I make these records with you in mind. It was sort of, Blue has known me and has seen me grow in a way that, you know, he just felt close to. And that then referencing all of my records, like, I didn't expect him to do that. And it just became this moment that transcended the story. And I think that's also the thing that got it, because it transcended the story, and now it became like McKinley, you know. And I think people think that the story is just a story, but it's all my life. So yeah, that moment was supposed to be the moment of rest after the record. That whole song was, you know, process it. What did you just hear? Do you feel the love? And then Blue came and just gave a verse that perfectly encapsulated that. Yeah.
That's interesting that you didn't expect him to necessarily kind of like spin it that way when he did sort of like give you the final verse. But when going into it, he did have a sense of the perspective he'd be writing from, obviously, like with the lead up to the intro. That's interesting.
Yeah. And it's also just something because, like, with a lot of these cats, you know, I'm younger than folks. So but you know how it is when you want to talk to your legends and you got the internet, you like, one day I'm a big fan, you know what I mean? I'm a one day, you know, and then like years go by, like one day, you know, especially with rappers, like the way I used to do it is I would just find your information and I would just write you an email if I wanted, you know. I didn't expect nobody to respond. I didn't expect nobody to hear it, but it's like, that's how I got Guilty Simpson and Sean Price on the first record, you know. Guilty Simpson connecting with Sean Price, you know, and I think that then created moments and like friendships that were just so different for who I am now. But with Blue, he just seen my growth, and then in such a short amount of time, because, you know, people can see your growth, but then they become aware of it. You know, there's a moment when it's like, oh, I cannot deny that this kid is different than everything else that I'm sort of feeling. And I think, yeah, I was like, you're the poster on my wall. You know, I love your music, but I didn't expect him to be like, you know, keep at it yourself. That really was just like, even with that alley-oop, I was like, I don't know, he's just gonna rap about some inspiration or something. You know what I mean? He's gonna be like, yeah, you know, keep hustling, keep pedaling.
Okay, wait a second. If we know anything about Blue, like he loves a concept. So
he do love a concept, but I don't tell people. See, I don't tell.
He was gonna take it and, you know what I mean? If you give him a concept, he's gonna take it and run.
I'm like, you're the poster on my wall, and I didn't expect him to be like, you are the poster on my wall. I was like, oh damn, well thank you, man. But it was definitely like this sort of thing where he had only heard that song and he fell in love with it. You know, I think then I met him also because he performed in Chicago, you know, so I met him, and it was just the timing of it all. The timing of it all worked out that he was then now like, okay, I think this is real. You know, I think hip hop is something that you sort of have to authenticate yourself in a lot of ways to get to where you got to be. So it was nice to feel that authentication unexpectedly too, you know. So
I'm not sure how exactly to frame this. Because I do have to ask, because, you know, again, from the features, from Blue to Qui Chris, as you say, sort of like Guilty Simpson and Sean Price. I mean, I'm not asking you outright like, oh, how did you get into hip hop? Like, obviously, you know, that's obvious. Like, you know, but with these artists and reference points, like, it's clear you've been in the internet alt rap trenches for years, you know? So it's like,
yeah.
I mean, obviously, like, while you're a hip hop fan and you're enjoying it, like a lot of people, like everybody is, you know, you've obviously arrived to it and have explored it along avenues that often a lot of people don't, you know? And I guess, like, you know, if I do have a question here, it's that, how did you come to this appreciation to where you're sort of like on the phrase with it, and it's like you've become, you know, obviously, like, you know, you know your big names and you appreciate the big records and the classics, the same ones that everybody else does, but simultaneously there's this burning passion and focus within you that's clearly there when you say something on the internet like, Billy Woods makes me want to rap again. Like, it's the first time every single time I hear him rap, you know what I mean? Like, you're hearing something in that not a lot of people are hearing. And, you know, I guess I'm wondering, like, how did you arrive to that where you're like, oh, this is great. You know, these big records and artists that everybody seems to appreciate are fine, but there's like something special and specific about this that's blowing me away that for whatever reason, not a lot of people tune into or even curious about, even if it comes across their path.
Yeah. So a lot of my time, like, you know, when these records is all from Richmond, Virginia, right? And Richmond, Virginia is a very punk city. It's like a very, like, you know, Guar from Richmond, like a lot of like very famous punk acts are from Richmond, Virginia, because that's the time, right? So around when I was coming up, it was just starting to switch over to other genres now we are at the height of house shows, and DIY is starting to include rap music, you know, like Flanagan is now like in Richmond making waves with his collective. You know, you hear something about this kid McKinley with a band and this house show, you know, and house shows were happening every week. So I was very involved in like DIY across multiple genres, a bunch of genres, because I also love hardcore music, right? So it was this thing where if I wanted to keep up and if I wanted to make the music that I make, I had to put my money where my mouth is. And you just got to listen to everything. You know what I mean? And now also, as I've grown, a lot of the people that, you know, stayed at my house when we was back in 2013, I stayed at their house in 2014. Like, now it's sort of, we are all coming into our own, and there's so many genres there that, I don't know, I love studying. And I think it's good to study other genres and other mediums and pull from that, because otherwise your record is going to sound a little stale, you know? And I think that it's just because I love hardcore music. You know, I love punk music. A lot of my homies that I came up with are punk musicians that sort of showed me what this means to be an outlier in a way, you know, as same as hip hop, you know, I mean, it sort of showed me that. And I think finding the similarities and connecting them is just a matter of past, present, and future, you know? So.
Shit. I mean, I agree. I feel like, I felt a similar way when I was, you know, not getting into music, but first got into punk music. And to me, that was kind of like a realization that, like, okay, this is like a weird, obscure DIY underground version of something that's like on the surface that everybody has access to. And that sort of made me wonder, I was like, is there that for every genre?
Exactly.
Is there that for everything else? And then I started looking and I was like, oh, there actually is that for everything else. There's a version of that for everything.
And it's existed for a long time too. You know what I mean? Like in different forms, like my favorite, like Blackie, incredible. You know, I used to see them all the time in Richmond. You know what I mean? Like Divide and Dissolve, like really great indigenous noise, like band. And it's like a lot of these artists were also coming to Richmond at a time where Richmond was finding its wings, you know, and being like, well, what do we fill house shows with? What does a mixed bill even mean for a community that is so heavy punk, you know? And it's like, oh, if you want to transition, it's easy to put like rapper with a DJ, McKinley Dixon punk band, you know? And that's how all of my shows. The first year we was out making music, I think it was like 42 shows because we was playing every weekend, you know, just because Richmond is warm all the time. So every house show, you can have a house show all the time. So, you know, I just found out that every genre has so much more to dive into, and it's going to take a lot of time, a lot of energy and effort, but you're going to find things that inspire you so much, you know, like The End of Recite Teeth or Fistful of Light, you know what I mean? Like Palehound plays on that one. So that's even its own thing, you know. Illuminati Hotties plays on Sugar Water. Like these are all people that this is just like over time, you know, so yeah.
Yeah. And I mean, there were some people asking earlier, but I mean, this also obviously explains connections and collabs you've done with people like Cheek Face, Soul Glow.
Oh, you know,
as well.
I love Cheek Face. Oh man, I love Cheek Face. I
mean, obviously very different collabs that came at different times, but if you want to get a little bit into that, because I do mess with both bands heavily.
Yeah. I mean, Soul Glow, and we go back, me and the boys. We go back. Like I've seen them in 2015, you know what I mean? Like Pierce is featured on The Importance of Self-Belief, Circle the Block. He does the vocals on the end of it. Like when I was really trying to experiment with like glitch and screamo and stuff, and that was 2016. Like Soul Glow is just a band that I have always been so intertwined with, as we are also Black folk in the DIY community, because there is something to be said about being 2013, being a Black person making a rap with a band and a Black person making punk music and figuring out how to maneuver those communities together and separately. You know, it's like I love Backwash. You know, it's like Backwash is one of the best. Backwash is completely different than me. Backwash still makes one of the best albums of the year. Like a week. Yeah,
I'm sure when that album came out, you're like, damn, I don't know if I could drop my album this year. Backwash just dropped.
I was like, oh man, we both is doing this whole little thing. You know what I mean? So I was, you know, it's just like these genres always intersect, and I've just came up with a lot of people, you know. Soul Glow is just one of those groups. Cheek Face is a different one. Cheek Face is funny because I just like Cheek Face, man. That was just like and we just followed each other, and it was like, yo, hop on this song. And I was like, phew, yeah, of course I'm gonna hop on a Cheek Face song. What am I do? Of course I'm gonna hop on a Cheek Face song. Yeah, it's Cheek Face, y'all. Yeah, that's the homies. Everybody's the homies, you know. I'm not gonna do it if we're not cool, you know. So but yeah, Cheek Face. Ooh, that was fun. That was fun. It's like 20-second verse, a 20-second verse on there.
It was fast, but it was a crazy track to begin with. Just a
right?
unhinged song for them. So I mean, why not? Why the hell not?
Right?
Why not? Yeah. Why not have a McKinley Dixon rap verse on it?
And it was just cool, man. Sometimes it's just, you know, that's the homies. Cheek Face is the homies. They cool in my hood. So yeah, I like that.
You know, I don't know if you probably have to head out soon. I don't want to open another.
I'm chilling. I mean, what you got? Another question? I'm chilling.
I mean, maybe open another can of worms. Really?
Yeah. Yeah.
You know, I saw another interview clip where you had described like, and this kind of came back to the reason I was asking you about Qui Chris earlier too, but you know, you were kind of talking about it, like all the comparisons that people are drawing with your music and so on and so forth, and people's perceptions of it due to the fact that we like live in what you described as like a post To Pimp a Butterfly era.
Oh man, oh man,
I don't disagree with the fact that album has like for a lot of people, well, I mean, you know, look, here's the thing. For a lot of people, you know, whether you want for it to be or not, that's a lot of people's first jazz rap album.
Yes, 100%, 100%.
Because of the time it came out,
yes,
the amount of visibility it had, that was just a lot of people's first jazz rap album. It's just
for all demographics,
for all demographics.
Yes.
In the same way that like for a lot of people who were like maybe 4 to 5 years younger than me and first getting into music, like My Beautiful Dark Twisted Fantasy was like their first rap album, you know?
Yes. No,
You know, so,
and yes, there's moments you could feel that. Yeah.
There's moments where a record sort of like blows up to a certain kind of perception because it just ends up being a first for a lot of people. And also on top of it ends up being sort of like a watermark too, because it's just a creative record undeniably.
Yes.
You know, but with that being said, I don't know, like, you know, do you feel like it's difficult to exist in this kind of like era as an artist that wants to make music that does make so many overt references to jazz, that when people come into the genre, they're thinking more T-Pab than thinking like, oh, The Roots or Tribe Called Quest or something like that? Because it seems like you have a wider array of reference points than some people are giving you credit for sometimes.
To Pimp a Butterfly, dog. Like, ooh, I mean, it's funny because To Pimp a Butterfly, like, I have a song that's called We Lovin' That Jazz. It came out like 2013. You know, it's like To Pimp a Butterfly. It was a time where it was either like people would say Chance the Rapper, Anderson .Paak, and then that To Pimp a Butterfly came out, man, and it was, you never heard, I never got compared to either of them after that. It was just To Pimp a Butterfly, To Pimp a Butterfly, To Pimp a Butterfly.
You Chance the Rapper, you?
Like, it was like, God. It was just, I mean, because he had the little, he would just, yeah, man, To Pimp a Butterfly, that record, and you go out in Europe, the first thing it's going to say on an interview with me is To Pimp a Butterfly. Like, any European blog, man, it's like, I don't even know. That record, I don't even remember what the question was, man. To Pimp a Butterfly. That record, that record is incredible. It's phenomenal. It transcends times, a certain cultural history moment, but I don't even like, that record was so much more funk inspired than like jazz to me that, I don't know. It influenced me. It influenced me in the fact that there's ways to make vulnerability happen in rap music that are alternative, that are not just a straight shot. You can sort of make the concept, but the thing is, that was never just The Pimp a Butterfly. That was also Good Kid, Section 80. I don't know, man. To Pimp a Butterfly, that record is just, yeah, man. That song sound nothing. They don't sound nothing like my records too. That's the crazy thing. Like, my records, if there's a Hell Below by Black Milk, Rock Creek Park by Odyssey, and probably Below the Heavens by Blue, rapping wise, and The Ecstatic by Mos Def. Those are like the actual records that I draw, you know what I mean? That sort of, that world from, to make the music the music I make. To Pimp a Butterfly.
I actually didn't think of The Ecstatic. That's
that's that's like a big one, because that one is like, the way he's talking is just so like, it just is so smooth, like he's whispering spells, you know what I mean? And it's just so, the magic he has is so casual within it. So that one's a big one too. But To Pimp a Butterfly, yeah, man, I love that record. But if you all listening want to do actual homework, if there's a Hell Below by Black Milk, Rock Creek Park by Odyssey, The Ecstatic by Mos Def, it ain't on no streaming, and you probably heard Blues, an undeniable classic. So yeah. No, I mean, it's obviously, I think, the world of the record, and it's got nothing to do with the album. It's just funny to me how I feel like we're in a weird place as far as music consumption goes. And it'll be one of the last things that I say, where it sort of seems like for certain things, people only seem to have like room in their heads for one. 100%. And I don't know what like the through line is, or what the pattern is, or why it is the way that it is, because it seems to sort of like shift in time in terms of like how much room people seem to have for certain things, and how and when there can be more of one thing and when there can't. There used to be a time where there could be only fucking one relevant female rapper at a time. Exactly.
And now it sort of seems like there can be as many as you want. And simultaneously, it sort of seems like in a lot of people's heads these days, we can only have room for one in our mind, like one conscious rapper.
Yes, definitely.
And it's like in the mainstream. Definitely. That is. And, as long as we have the one in our head, we can't think about any others, or if there are any others, we have to immediately sort of like compare them to the one that is the most popular, and sort of like, if they're not as good in our minds, then why even bother sort of like considering their music? It's just very odd, especially considering like, I come from a time when, backpack rap was a thing. Yeah. And there was room for a lot of different rappers of that stripe. I mean, obviously, all of them and many of them had a difficult time sort of breaking into the mainstream, but there wasn't really this sort of like consideration among that fan base that like, we already know the one that we like. We don't need any others. It's like everybody involved in that scene is like, no, we fuck with all these guys. We think they're all great. We want to hear all of them. Yeah. Whereas, it sort of seems to be like this willingness to sort of just limit yourself for whatever reason to just like, the one or two that, are the most easily accessible and just not sort of dig any further and not consider anything else that might come across your path.
Exactly. And I mean, backpack rap era also, you got to take into account like the demographic of that time too. You know what I mean? It was a lot of folks sort of coming up and being like, this is accessible differently. You know what I mean? Like, this is something that I can also do in a way that is not, it just, everyone has something to say, and it was a completely different time back then. But now it is like, oh yeah, there's one that you can be. And I think it is because, people put things to the forefront so fast, and they want to tell you that they put it to the forefront so fast, more so. It's like everybody loves to be like, I got here first. But they don't love to be like, well, maybe I should explain how I got here first. You know what I mean? Like, I think that I will literally never, ever escape the Timber Butterfly comparisons. Even if I start making music that is not like Timber Butterfly, even if I just start screaming to a microphone, I think people are going to be like, you remember when he did that on I? He probably is doing that based off, this sound like the Pimp Butterfly. You know what I mean?
Even if you have punk guitars on the whole thing, the
whole thing. So it's like
the moment that a horn comes in, they'll be like, oh.
They were like, that reminds me.
That's that
to Pimp a Butterfly. You ever heard of this record called King Kunta? And it's like, bro, that sounds like funk music. Also, that was made like, whenever that comparison happens, it's honestly more so embarrassing because it's like, bro, like my record don't sound like that. You tell it like that record is crazy, man. Like you telling somebody that you don't know, this sound like the Pimp. That was Flying Lotus in Kamasi, Washington, and
right.
We all gonna look dumb, and they're gonna be like, it don't sound like the Pimp Butterfly. And it's like, yeah, no, it doesn't sound like the Pimp Butterfly. It sounds like Chance the Rapper. So. Sounds like it sounds like whatever that last record was.
All right. Thank you, man, for your time and being an open book and telling us everything about the record and your process and everything, man.
Yeah, no problem, man. Thank you. How you feel about that camera angle? You like that?
Yeah, it looks good.
Yeah, it's good. You like it a little bit better? Nice. Nice.
Oh, it's good.
Nice. Yeah. Glad I calibrated that.
All right. I hope you have a nice rest of your day inside. And
definitely.
Enjoy your alone time.
Thank you.
All right. Have a good one, man.
Peace.